Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We're so delighted and so honored that you're joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Himalaya, Ghana, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is the award-winning author, Andrea Wang. She is here to celebrate Watercress. Before we invite Andrea into the studio, we want to invite all the authors that are listening to the show to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page to find out how we can help you celebrate your fantastic book. You can be a guest here on the podcast. It's fun. It's easy. It gives you a chance to have a long-form conversation, to let the world know all about what your book is about, the inspiration for the book, your goals as an author. Let folks know about you. And it doesn't cost a thing. No need to pay anybody to facilitate your visit. You can also learn about our Certified Great Read program. If our panel believes that your book is worthy of 4 or 5 out of 5 stars, it becomes a Certified Great Read. And with that status comes a number of really powerful tools to help families know that your book is worthy of their consideration. You can also find out about our great promotional packages. We can celebrate your fantastic children's book through commercials here on the podcast, through messages to our there's a lot of thousands of social media followers, 75,000 plus social media followers. And we also have a way to display your book on our nationwide network of digital pedestrian billboards. Learn all about that by going to our website, readingwithyourkids.com, clicking on the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page. Oh, I am so excited. We are so lucky to have the author of Watercress. It's the Newbery Honor-winning book from our guest, the author, Andrea Wang. Hey, Andrea, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Jed. I'm excited to be here.
I'm really excited to have you on, too. Why don't we just start by you giving us, by telling us a little bit about Watercress?
Oh, sure. Watercress is a semi-autobiographical story of a memory that I have of being made to pick watercress by the side of the road as a kid. And I grew up in rural Ohio, and my parents were Chinese immigrants. And so I was really not happy about having to do this because I felt already like I didn't belong. And the book itself talks about my experience of that, and then it has sort of a fictionalized ending where, you know, the character comes to a realization about her own parents' childhoods in China and what watercress means to them. So she comes at the end to a newfound appreciation of her culture and heritage.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit, Andrea and I were both talking about growing up, and I was telling her about the somewhat wild and crazy neighborhood that I grew up in, where everybody fit in, even though we were different. There was some diversity there, but and we would fight with each other. But once we left the neighborhood to go to another neighborhood, we were all cousins. It was like the biggest family in the world. I mean, and we didn't look alike, but we were all cousins. You mess with one of us. And what was it like growing up feeling like you didn't fit in?
It was hard, for sure, and lonely. And I sought refuge in books. And I think that's why I'm a writer today, is because I spent so many hours, like literally in the closet of my bedroom, with the cat and, you know, a pile of chocolate chips and a book. And so, you know, I had friends, but I'm not sure that I understood them. And there were definitely a lot of times that I didn't feel understood. We were one of 2 Chinese American families in town that I remember with kids my age. I had a fairly diverse classroom in the sense that there were white kids, there were biracial kids, there were African American kids, but I was the only Asian American kid in my grade for all the years that I lived in Ohio.
Interesting. I don't think of, and you just kind of reinforce it, I don't think of Ohio being, and especially rural Ohio, being a place where there's a lot of Asian families living. I guess the question is, what brought you there? What brought your family there?
Oh, my father was a professor at Antioch College in Yellow Springs, which is the town I grew up in. And it's a progressive town for that time period. Mm-hmm. And still is a very liberal, progressive town. But you're right, there were not many Asian American people there. So he taught Chinese studies and, he taught Chinese language at the college.
Excellent. I've shared on the podcast here. We've hosted international kids in our home over the years, and we've had 5 amazing daughters come to live with us from China, and they became part of our family and remain part of our family. It's unfortunate now that they're back home. It's really difficult to communicate with them because of restrictions in China on using social media and whatnot. So I've really missed them a lot.
Oh, WeChat.
Yeah,
you should download. You use WeChat?
I have to figure out how to do that.
That's how I communicate with my in-laws who are in Shanghai.
Okay. We'll check that out. So you were talking about falling in love with books and just reading, and that was kind of your safe space. You went into the STEM fields.
I did.
Yeah. Talk to us about, going from being that book lover to getting into the STEM fields to returning to becoming an author.
I have always been a book lover. I always wanted to write, but my parents were very traditional, Chinese parents. I wouldn't say that they were tiger parents or anything like that, but they were very focused on my getting an education and having a job that they thought would provide me with stability. And being a writer was not a stable job. And it still isn't. It's very difficult to make a living as a writer. Mm-hmm. But I love science because I had always wanted to figure out how the world works. What makes people tick, just the interconnectedness of everything. And so when I was in college, my parents steered me away from an English degree and, basically said you need to get either a science degree or some other sort of, degree that will lead to a professional job. And I studied ecology and got my, a biology degree because I really liked learning how the world works. And I still write about a lot of that, things that are connected. Mm-hmm. And, it was a fairly, I loved my job as an environmental scientist, but I had children and I stopped working because it was really difficult mm-hmm. to raise children and have a full-time job at the same time. And I was fortunate enough to be able to stay home with them. And I started reading them picture books and fell in love with that format and decided to go back to school when they were a little older and got my master's degree in creative writing. And from there, it's just, it's just sort of taken off, which has been amazing. But yeah, my children really inspired me to come back to writing.
That's wonderful. Now, were your parents able to see your success as an author?
No, unfortunately not. They both passed before I published my first book. Mm-hmm. And, and I'm still inspired by them. Watercress is very much my continuing a conversation with them in a way. It's in the back, in the author's note, I write that it's both an apology and a love letter to my parents. And people often focus on that and they're like, how can it, be both? Or what do you mean by this? And to me, it seems fairly clear, I can't tell them I'm sorry for being, not as compassionate or empathetic as I could have been towards them when I was little. And also just an appreciation for everything they went through and how they raised me.
Yeah. When you mentioned that you didn't have as much empathy. Were you angry that you weren't the same, that they weren't the same, and and how come I can't be like all the other kids?
Sure. Definitely there was a degree of anger and resentment. I mean, it's nothing they could have changed, right? It's just the way it is. We're Chinese. But, my friends who have grown up in communities that had a lot more Asian Americans had a very different experience growing up. So, I was probably resentful, like, why did we have to live here? And why don't I belong? And why can't you behave like all the other kids' parents, So there's that degree of, shame and embarrassment that I talk about in the book.
I'm imagining that this would be a wonderful way for family just to sit down and talk about themselves and how they're different from the other members of the community, even if they look alike, even if they have the same ethnicity. And also at the same time talking about how we might be able to reach out to kids that are in our class that might feel the way you felt growing up.
Yeah, I really do hope that the book is a conversation starter, for kids who, of all races and all backgrounds. We've all felt like our parents have embarrassed us or made us, do things we didn't want to do. We all feel alone at some point. And, when I do school visits, I talk to the kids and I say, even the most popular kid in school has felt like they don't belong at some point. And so, when I was little and felt very alone, it never occurred to me that writing about it would be this universal emotion that everybody could connect to. But, the reception to the book has shown me that we all do share those feelings.
Yeah. One of the things that I was very aware of when my son was in middle school, and I would drive the van around, and all of the guys would spend a ton of energy trying to pretend that they knew it all and that they were cool and that they had all the answers. And at one point, after listening to this for about 45 minutes one particular day, I just kind of turned to him and said, hey, you guys are all trying to pretend that you know it all. None of you guys know anything. So why don't you just sit back and just appreciate the fact that you're all clueless?
Right. Middle school is such a hard age.
Such a difficult age. You talked about being really interested in as a scientist, in working in the ecology, finding out how things were connected and how the world works. How do people work? How does the connections between people work?
I mean, that's the $64,000 question, right? Like, if we knew. I think that's why I write, because I don't really know. Writing for me is a process of trying to figure it out. And I'm not saying that I have any of the answers, but I think just being emotionally honest in what I write is bringing me closer to understanding how people work, or just trying, it is more than just a matter of putting yourself in someone else's shoes. And that's a step for sure. But I think the conversations need to happen. The sharing of stories and family history needs to happen for us to really understand our connections to each other.
How hard is it for you as a writer to open yourself up and to be emotionally honest and share that on the page?
It's so hard. I mean, I'm, a diehard introvert. These are emotions that I would never have admitted to as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult. I mean, I was one of those kids in your van trying to pretend that I had all the answers and I knew what was going on. You don't want to show any weakness, right? But somehow over the years of working on this story, I mean, Watercress has had many different forms, and I rewrote it as a picture book. And that was about 7 or 8 years into the process of working on it. And I just went there. Both my parents had passed away. I really just tried to inhabit my younger self and have that conversation with them on the page. And it was really hard, but really cathartic. I mean, I cried the entire time typing. And then, kept crying afterwards whenever I read it because it was so raw. It's taken many readings of the book so that I can read it without choking up. But I think kids deserve that kind of effort from us, right? That kind of emotional honesty, as I said.
Yeah. Why do you think that this story was best told as a picture book?
Oh, that's such a good question. I mean, it started out as a personal essay for adults because I was taking a class in writing the personal essay, and it wasn't working. And I decided many years later to try and write it as a picture book, but I was told in third person. It's told in first person present tense right now. And that really wasn't working, but it allowed me to get that sort of emotional distance that I needed to put more of that rawness into it, more of that emotional honesty. And then when I finally converted it to first person is where I found sort of that sweet spot, right? I was finally able to acknowledge this is me and this is how I feel. And I think it works as a picture book because there are so many kids that don't understand why their parents do what they do or ask them to do certain things. As parents, we don't necessarily feel that we have to explain ourselves, right? And so I think most kids can relate to that. And I also really like that as a picture book, kids are being exposed to these difficult feelings and concepts in a book, and maybe they'll find something that resonates with them, and they'll feel less alone.
Yeah. I love that books, especially kids' books, can be used as mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors.
Yeah.
What can kids outside of the Asian community see about your community, about you through Watercress?
I think, again, hopefully that we all share the same feelings. We share a common humanity. We're all the same as people. We might look different, but we deserve to be here. We are American. We have all these thoughts and dreams and feelings as everybody else does. And I have actually heard from many people of all backgrounds and races who have said, oh, my parents made me pick whatever from, the field, the roadside, etc. We stole apples out of the orchard, whatever. And that was terribly embarrassing too. And it seems to be this common experience of foraging, but also of being, ashamed of our families that we don't need to. I think we need to see that we should be proud of who we are.
Yeah. You use the expression that this book is kind of like a continuing conversation with your parents. And I know that you've been able to express things to them through the book. Have you heard anything back from your parents?
Well, they're passed. They've passed away.
I know that, but I mean, have you felt anything coming back from their spirit? And I'm not saying like ghost, but just feeling.
I've not been visited,
right? No.
But I think they would be proud of me. I hope that they'd be proud of me. But I also think that they'd be like, well, why this story? Did you have to tell this story? And I think my answer would be, well, look how many people it's helped so far. So yes. It deserved to be told. I think for them it would have been just something really small, like barely worth mentioning. But I do think it's important to show that not all Asian Americans are crazy rich Asians. We're not all, living the high life, that there's, a significant proportion who either need to forage or, struggle making ends meet.
Yeah. The book has been loved by everybody. It was a Newbery Honor winner. Jason's illustrations won the Caldecott Medal. It was given an award by the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association. What's that feel like?
Incredible and surreal, and it's a couple weeks later. I'm still kind of in disbelief. It's just been amazing, and I think I'm just so honored and so grateful. Mm-hmm. It's hard to put into words, right? Because especially the Newbery Honor is typically not given to picture books, or hasn't been in the past. So that's just it has been an incredible experience. Yeah. A validation of my work.
Yeah. I know the Caldecott is memorable to me because growing up in Boston almost 100 years ago, I owned Make Way for Ducklings. That was one of the books, and that had that medal on the cover. And I thought that was so cool because it was raised and you could touch it, and it was, and this is my book and it has a medal on it and everything. What was it like working? I know you illustrators and writers of picture books don't work hand in hand, but what was it like collaborating with Jason on this book?
It was awesome. I mean, because you're right. Usually the author and the illustrator don't even speak, or, may have never met or anything. And, are in fact sometimes discouraged from talking to each other. Whereas in the case of Watercress, our editor, Neil Porter, thought that since it was such a personal story for me, that it would help Jason to talk to me about it and learn more about my family and stories and maybe see photos. So he introduced us to each other at a conference in the before times when they were still in person. And, we sat and talked, and over the couple of years that he worked on the illustrations, I shared photos and we shared family stories. We had phone calls and stuff. It was very collaborative, but I, really wanted to make sure that I didn't impose my vision of what it should look like on him. And I wanted also, because I didn't honestly know, I'm not a visual artist. I didn't know how, he was going to depict those flashbacks, those memories. This book is so internal, right? But he just did an amazing job, right? And all the emotions that play across the faces of the characters it's incredible.
Yeah. It's amazing. And picture books and illustrations can be so very, very powerful, and just add many, many different layers to the story.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That was one of the things I do remember talking, remember when I was reading with my kids many years ago, and just sit down and read a page and then just talk about the illustrations. What do you think that they're feeling, and what's her expression? What's his expression? What else is going on in the background? What do you think it would be like to be in that moment?
Yeah, that's great. I do think that growing up the way I did, I learned how to decode, people's expressions and the tones of their voices maybe a little bit more, but and tried to infuse that into the book as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, this is not your first book. You have lots of books out there. If somebody is just loves Watercress, as I'm sure they will, what would be the next couple of books that you would suggest they check out from your library?
From what's on my shelves, or what I wrote?
From what you wrote.
From what I wrote. Oh, well, I would say if you're looking for a chapter book, The Many Meanings of Meilon is my debut middle grade that came out last fall, and it is also very much a character that resembles me. And it's interesting. My editor said that Meilon sounds like a prequel to Watercress, but for older readers, because in that book, the main character, Meilon, moves from Boston Chinatown, where she's lived all her life, to rural Ohio. and encounters microaggressions and is renamed and, learns how to deal with all of that. Yeah. And as far as picture books go, I have a new one coming out from Neil Porter Books called Luly and the Language of Tea. And it's about an immigrant child from China who is in a classroom setting with a bunch of other kids who don't speak English and all speak different languages because it's like an ESL classroom. And the word for tea in over 200 languages originally came from the Chinese word for tea, where, tea was discovered. So saying that word aloud sort of brings all these kids together because they recognize it in some form in their own language.
Awesome. Well, having spent many hours in Boston's Chinatown performing and with friends and, of course, eating, and also spending lots of time in rural Ohio, that's a big difference. Talk about two different worlds.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I personally did the reverse. I grew up in rural Ohio and moved to Boston. I didn't live in Chinatown. Mm-hmm. I lived, in the suburbs, but it was like this palpable sense of relief stepping into Chinatown. Yeah. Like everybody looks like me. Everybody gets where I'm coming from. I feel very comfortable here.
That's cool. Well, I know people are going to want to know where they can go to find out more about Watercress and more about Andrea Wang.
My website, which is AndreaYWang.com. And I've got lots of links to different interviews and podcasts, and I'll be linking this podcast there too.
Awesome. We've had a great time speaking to the author of the Newbery Honor-winning book, Watercress, and we've been speaking with Andrea Wang. Hey, Andrea, thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Luke Homan. He'll be here to celebrate First Root. It's a really groundbreaking financial literacy education program. You don't want to miss it. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Chris, I want to start by thanking our guest, Andrea Wang. Please be sure to check out Watercress. Also want to thank my team, Alejandro Doherty, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Skylar Strauss, Frank Garrios. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.